Hey guys. Tonight we settle into a softly lit corner of 19th century Paris, where the muffled clink of porcelain teacups meets the hushed murmur of powdered wigs and handwritten letters. You probably think salons were just fancy chit-chat sessions for aristocrats, but here, the air itself feels alive, perfumed with lavender-scented candles mixed with the faint metallic tang of ink on paper. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Share where you are and your local time in the comments. I'm curious if Paris is waking up under gas lamps right now or winding down across something like the Pacific. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey together. As you push open the velvet curtains, adorned with tasseled fringe that brushes softly against your fingertips, you step into an elegantly cluttered drawing room. The high ceilings are painted with cherubs chasing stars, and tall windows framed by heavy damask drapes offer a speckled glimpse of gaslight illuminating wrought iron balconies outside. A faint rustle of silk and muslin accompanies the gentle tap-tap of polished boots on parquet floors. There's a subtle warmth that seeps into your bones, as if the room itself is inviting you to lean in and listen. Your eyes drift over gilded mirrors reflecting dozens of aristocratic faces, some flushed with excitement, others leaning forward in studious repose. A few individuals curve around small tables, each draped in embroidered tablecloths, exhaling clouds of lavender smoke from extinguished scented candles. The salon's hostess, usually a woman of considerable influence, known as a salonnière, stands near a gleaming mahogany sideboard. Her jeweled brooch catches the flicker of lamplight, scattering tiny rainbows across the walnut paneling. As a mainstream historical fact, Parisian salons of this era were often hosted by these salonnières, many of whom were powerful cultural arbiters shaping literary, political, and scientific conversations around their drawing rooms. You notice a gentle hierarchy in the arrangement. Guests of the highest rank, viscountesses and barons, sit closer to the hostess, sipping rose-tinted champagne from slender flutes. A spare handful of chairs near the back belong to young poets, chattering in hushed enthusiasm as they trade manuscripts. Somewhere amid this buzz, a timid scholar adjusts the lenses on a tabletop telescope, which leads to curious glances from others who wonder if astronomy has indeed found its place among art and politics. Historians still argue whether salons served primarily as cultural salons shaping Enlightenment thought or as discrete political arenas where whispered conspiracies brewed. But tonight, either faction claims dominance. Tonight's energy leans toward gentle curiosity, tinged with an undercurrent of refined ambition. As you settle into an upholstered armchair, its cushions a swirl of blue brocade, you sense that the salon's popularity extends beyond mere fashion. It is where art, science, and sociability entwine. By the mid-19th century, countless influential figures, writers like Victor Hugo, painters like Ingres, and composers like Chopin, honed their reputations in such drawing rooms, proving that mingling beneath chandeliers could indeed shape broader currents of French culture. A subtle scent of bergamot wafts from a silver tray holding assorted pastries, petit fours, fruit-filled eclairs, and marzipan sweets shaped like tiny crescent moons, nodding to the gathering's celestial curiosity. That ambrosial aroma lingers alongside the ghost of tobacco, a nod to cigars offered discreetly to gentlemen who would rather mask polite yawns than admit tiredness. You can practically hear the faint creaking of a chair as someone shifts to better hear the hostess, whose voice floats like a gentle lullaby. She begins with a soft anecdote about last week's chilly evening when she glimpsed the Pleiades perched above Montmartre, leading naturally to the evening's theme, exploring how amateur astronomy is forging unexpected alliances in Parisian high society. In one corner, a gentleman clad in a dark velvet frock coat taps ash from his cigar into a porcelain saucer. He leans toward a lady in a high waxed hairdo, sharing a clandestine remark about how his homemade telescope, cobbled from brass scraps and gifted lenses, shows Saturn's rings in more detail than any engraver's sketch. You catch a flicker of admiration in the lady's eyes, an implicit promise that tonight's conversation will shift beyond polite chatter. Nearby, The hostess gestures at a still life painted on the wall, a celestial map, weathered parchment with hand-inked constellations, hung behind a gilded frame. This map is not mere decoration, it's a conversation starter inviting you to follow her finger as she traces Orion's belt toward Taurus. In this salon, everything feels intentional, from the placement of fragrant flower bouquets next to leather-bound books, to the choice of embroidered cushions matching the room's pewter gray walls. You can almost feel the subtle electricity in the room's fabric, as though every thread has absorbed the animated hush of countless intellectual sparrings. Though the chatter remains civilized, an undercurrent of rivalry hums like a distant tuning fork, each guest eager to appear well-read yet relaxed enough to seem effortlessly gifted. In between passing plates of sugared almonds and whispered exclamations of delight over the hostess's new powdered copper hairstyle, you discern a nuanced etiquette at play. A visitor may inquire about the latest poetic journal, then very gently steer the talk toward shared observations of lunar phases. It's all grounded in unspoken rules. A woman's fan never points directly at another, lest subtle offense be taken. A gentleman's cane comes to rest on the floor, never leaned against a table that hosts a telescope. And yet, despite these formalities, there's a richness that emanates from the assembled guests, a communal breath coaxing raw ideas from their hushed, private musings into a broader tapestry of Parisian enlightenment. You lean forward as the hostess, redolent in lavender and lace, introduces the theme for the evening, charting the heavens by candlelight in the heart of Paris. It's a tidbit that might surprise you. She once commissioned a local clockmaker to fashion a mechanical aurora that ticked in tandem with her mantelpiece clock, displaying the planet's slow ballet every hour. That aurora now rests silently beneath velvet at one side of the room, a subtle testament to the host's fascination with the cosmos. As she stands under a small halo of lamplight, her voice soft yet confident, you sense that she's about to usher everyone into a world where stars are no longer distant, untouchable points, but companions in a shared intellectual voyage. Slowly, the murmur of animated discussion gives way to a hush as guests pivot toward dimly lit alcoves where small telescopes stand upon tables, unobtrusive but unmistakably purposeful. The expectation is clear. This isn't mere performance. Tonight is a gathering of genuine curiosity, where whispered facts about lunar craters pass easily between music score analyses. Gentle laughter drifts across the room as one scholar corrects another's pronunciation of Apennine Mountains, referring, of course, to the mountain range on the moon rather than the Italian hills. The correction lands softly, like a feather, and draws a ripple of polite amusement. As you observe, a gentleman's cufflink, shaped like a miniature star, catches a glimmer from the chandelier, hinting that personal adornments too champion this celestial fad. Some guests tuck into decorative snuffboxes carved with zodiac signs, delicately sniffing cinnamon-scented powders. Others, fascinated by new inventions, pass around a small pamphlet detailing a recently published treatise on telescope lens grinding, sold by the same artisan who crafted the iron balconies outside. You realize that this first section is not merely about setting a scene, it's an invitation to become part of this tapestry, to breathe the same rarefied air as those who turned leisurely tea into contemplative science. You feel a soft settling of shoulders, a recognition that this important tradition, born from gatherings of curious souls, is more intimate and humble than we often remember. As you lean back into the quiet luxury of the chair, the echoes of carefully chosen classical pieces blend with the soft rustle of Parisian silk and the almost inaudible click of ticking clocks. It's as if the room itself is holding its breath, waiting for you to join the threads of inquiry that will soon tie your imagination to those glittering dots overhead. You sink deeper into the velvet-lined armchair as the low hum of conversation continues to swirl around you, but now your attention shifts to a quieter current beneath the salon's glittering surface, the subtle, steady rise of amateur science. In this age of blossoming industrialization, Parisians of comfortable means begin to treat scientific inquiry not as a distant pursuit reserved for royal academies, but as a genteel pastime to practice at home. You might think that laboratories brimming with chemicals and copper coils belong only to men in white smocks. But here, in the hush of a candlelit salon, you glimpse women dusting off treatises on optics while gentlemen polish brass telescope tubes. And you understand that this phenomenon hinges on a democratizing spirit seeping into every layer of Parisian society. As a mainstream historical fact, by the mid-19th century many well-to-do Parisians received private education in the sciences. Educational reforms under Napoleon and later the July monarchy expanded access to scientific texts and amateur kits for chemistry or electricity. These reforms rippled outward, so that a Parisian physician's daughter could consult her father's medical microscope at home, or a factory owner's son could experiment with galvanic cells by candlelight. For you, nestled in this early evening sensation of cloves and cedarwood, it means observing the way a simple curiosity for the natural world became a mark of refinement. You notice several young women, coiffed in silk ribbons, passing around a small battery apparatus, a handful of zinc and copper plates layered in lemon juice, igniting tiny sparks that draw delighted gasps. Their giggles ripple like soft wind chimes against the salon's hush, and you realize that experimentation has become a social affair, not the isolated toil of a lone academic. As you glance across the room, a gentleman in a charcoal frock coat explains, in calm tones that carry like a lullaby, how he repurposed an old clock spring from a broken carriage to power a rudimentary mechanical calculator. His version of a computing machine, he calls it, in voice barely above a whisper. Somewhere near the settee, a freshly minted engineer, his jacket still dusted with wood shavings, traces the circuitry of a Leyden jar etched onto paper, marking where glass might meet metal to hold an electrical charge. These are people who, after attending lectures at the Jardin des Plantes or paging through the latest installments of the Journal des Savants, decide to bring science's magic to their drawing rooms. It's not just technology that interests them. Natural history grows equally fashionable. You watch a salonnière delicately arrange glass cases of pressed botanical specimens along a narrow oak shelf. She murmurs to her neighbor that, with just a few sheets of blotting paper and a walk to Bois de Boulogne, anyone could create a respectable herbarium. You can almost feel her gentle pride. At least one middle-class family in the city now harvests wildflowers every spring, ironing them between weighted novels so that their sprigs of campion and primrose might endure far longer than a single season's bloom. A quirky tidbit drifts to your ears. One bachelor explains how he keeps a small colony of silkworms in a box case by his window, convinced that feeding them leaves gathered from Montmartre's mulberry trees could yield unique silk threads for his tailor-made waistcoats. He's neither a nobleman nor a formal economist. He's simply keen on testing whether urban silkworm silk can rival product from rural cocoons. He rattles on about how he once tried feeding them tea leaves instead, resulting in a batch of larvae that, according to him, hummed among themselves as they devoured the strange diet. Though you chuckle at the thought of humming caterpillars, there's a sense that such playful experimentation reflects a broader shift. Parisian leisure is no longer limited to composing sonnets or perfecting table manners. Instead, it now includes measuring leaves under a lens, twitching a galvanometer needle, or calculating moonrise times. You sense that this embrace of amateur science rests on two pillars: a genuine appetite for discovery and an eagerness to display erudition among peers. It's not uncommon for an ordinary bourgeois weekend to include a trip to the Paris Observatory's public lectures, followed by a visit to a cousin's house to test an electroplating apparatus built from a salvaged wine barrel. As another mainstream historical fact, by the early 1850s, local ideologies of bourgeois respectability held that no well-mannered Parisian should be ignorant of basic scientific principles. Households stocked chemistry sets, libraries included treatises on electricity, and popular installments of scientific translations, German experiments explained in French, became bestsellers. Within this milieu, you notice the ladies wearing long skirts lined with deep pockets, an unusual design that lets them carry pocket microscopes fashioned by local opticians. One woman, idly tracing lace patterns along her cuff, explains that she has spent the afternoon examining the wing veins of a dragonfly she caught in the Tuileries garden. She leans close and shows you a sketch she's made. The shadows she observed under magnification have translated into delicate cross-hatched notes on the paper. You feel as though you're peering over her shoulder into a secret world, half microscopic, half dream. Yet there's a subtle tension beneath this enthusiastic engagement. Some traditionalists still regard amateur science as frivolous at best and undignified at worst. Your hostess shares, in a whisper meant only for you, that she once heard a murmur at the Comédie Française about silly women tinkering with voltmeters. But she dismisses that with a mild sigh. If anything, salon-based experiments reinforce one's social standing. You sense that the underlying contest isn't merely who can boast of writing the most eloquent lyric, but who can boast of discovering a new mineral or calculating sunspot cycles. And so, the salon becomes a crucible where genteel conversation melds with a modest rivalry to outdo neighbors in scientific savoir-faire. As you listen to these hushed self-assessments, you pick up on the fact that many Parisians also embrace science at home because it offers a reprieve from political tensions roiling the city. The revolutions of 1830 and 1848 remain fresh in memory. Many salons shifted to safer subjects to keep the peace. Science, with its promise of observation rather than debate, becomes a social balm. A middle-aged lawyer mentions how, after attending a raucous parliamentary session earlier that day, he looked forward to examining the rings of Saturn through a borrowed brass refractor. He describes the silence that falls on a room when someone finally sights the rings, like a shared secret, erasing rancor. Even if briefly. In that hush, social distinctions blur. A marquise and a craftsperson exchange knowing glances about Apian's lunar maps, their differences in rank slipping aside as they venerate the same celestial bodies. Every so often, you're reminded of how Paris sites like the Musée des Arts et Métiers cater to this cultural shift by offering public demonstrations of new machines, Jacquard looms, steam engines, electric telegraphs. Guests at tonight's salon have likely visited those demonstrations and returned home to fashion makeshift models using scraps from local workshops. You imagine them rifling through ironmongers' stalls at Les Halles, picking up surplus glass rods, curiosities of copper wire, or antiquated clock springs. Here's a curious notion. One young teacher confesses to you, with a conspiratorial smile, that she once repurposed an old walking stick to house a hidden telescope inside, so she could surreptitiously aim it through her bedroom window to chart Jupiter's moons while faithful servants thought she was merely strolling on her balcony. It's that very blend of secrecy and utility that gives the age its unique flavor. Later in the evening, an older gentleman, his powdered hair already graying at the temples, sits back with a satisfied smile as he recounts how he acquired some meteor fragments recently exhibited at a Parisian curiosity shop. He gently cradles the small piece of charred stone in a plush velvet pouch, explaining that, to him, the thrill of holding a fragment that fell from the heavens outshines the newest fashion in silk cravats. You feel yourself shiver with delight at the idea of the cosmos touching everyday life, of a piece of rock that once burned through Earth's atmosphere now nestled in a velvet pouch on Rue Saint-Germain. Within these hushed exchanges, you detect a subtle undercurrent. The more amateur scientists demonstrate their knowledge, the more they solidify their place in an evolving society. By engaging with new instruments and scientific journals, they show that taste and curiosity transcend mere wealth or aristocratic pedigree. Indeed, historians still argue whether this embrace of amateur science truly democratized knowledge or simply provided the bourgeoisie with another badge of distinction. But tonight, that question drifts away into the muffled crackle of oil lamps, leaving you with a clear impression. Science has become as much a social currency as any delicate porcelain or rare foreign tea. Under a softly hypnotic lamplight, you observe a gentleman polishing his new achromatic lens with cotton cloth, intent on reducing chromatic aberration so he can finally perceive the moons of Mars. Another guest slides a foil-wrapped notebook across the table. She's taken careful notes on her observation of Venus's crescent phase just 3 nights ago. Their voices, low and respectful, intertwine as if performing a delicate quadrille, guiding you through each meticulous procedure, from calibrating micrometer screws to stoking the small, cheerful flame of a pair of carbide lamps. It's a scene that parallels your own fascination, pulling you deeper into a world where wonder lives in microcosms of glass and polished metal, where minute orbs reimagine humanity's place beneath an indigo vault. In this calm, congenial atmosphere, you come to see that amateur science denotes more than a hobby. It serves as both a refuge from political strife and an emblem of enlightened leisure. These Parisian salon-goers aspire not merely to outshine their peers in dancing or debate, but to claim intellectual authority over the universe's grand tableau. In doing so, they unwittingly lay the groundwork for an era where scientific societies burgeon, journals proliferate, and knowledge moves from exclusive academies into private drawing rooms. As soft fingertips of candlelight graze the gilded ceiling, you realize that this cultural shift marks a turning point. The walls of the salon, once only adorned with tapestries or portraits, now bear fragile sketches of eclipses, maps of the Andromeda Nebula, and diagrams of electromagnetic coils. The very act of assembling curious minds in a drawing room becomes part of history's quiet revolution, a revolution conducted not in the clamor of barricades, but in the hushed glow of kerosene lamps and the simple turn of a telescope knob. You lean forward as the flicker of candlelight dances off dark mahogany, reflecting your curiosity back at you. The energy in this salon has shifted subtly, as if the evening's earlier fervor for home chemistry has yielded to a hushed reverence for what lies overhead. You recall the host's mention that just a few streets away, the Paris Observatory opens its doors to the public on select evenings, offering peasants, merchants, and nobility alike the chance to glimpse Saturn's rings through a 2-foot refractor, an apparatus that, until recently, sat reserved for astronomers in ivory towers. As a mainstream historical fact, by the 1850s, the city of Paris offered scheduled public tours at the Observatoire de Paris, attracting up to several hundred curious visitors each month. Tonight's salon reflects that growing public fascination. Telescopes, once rare curiosities, have trickled from grand institutions into genteel drawing rooms. You notice a young gentleman, his curly hair brushed back to reveal a smudge of soot on his cheek, a sign he's likely been chomping cigars while polishing brass lenses. He gestures with ceremonious care as he demonstrates a foldable refractor, its lenses glinting under the lamplight. You slowly realize that by 7 o'clock each evening, as gas lamps hiss to life across cobblestone streets, eager stargazers surge toward Montparnasse's rooftops, clutching velvet-wrapped telescopes. The allure of spying Jupiter's moons, Ganymede, Callisto, Io, and Europa, feels almost like a rite of passage for any well-read Parisian. You think how strange it is that, a generation earlier, scientists like Urbain Le Verrier only shared their planetary predictions in formal bulletins. Now you, and this entire room, are poised to peer at the same worlds using instruments lighter than a shoebox, yet promising glimpses of distant realities. As you shift in your chair, a soft clink of a porcelain teacup draws your attention to a lady in lavender silk who offers you a sip of chamomile-infused tea. She whispers about an eccentric local innkeeper who set up a telescope on the terrace of his modest café near Rue de la Paix. Patrons who once came for café au lait now stare skyward after their second cup, debating whether those fuzzy lights in the east might be nebulae or simply smudged gaslight reflections on the lens. She chuckles softly at the thought of bakers catching starlight on their flour-dusted aprons before dawn, measuring angles between Orion's belt to estimate when they might fire up their ovens. You roll your shoulders back and catch sight of a portable star chart propped against a small easel decorated with trailing vines of ivy. It's printed in pale gray ink, almost ethereal against its cream paper background, showing the nightly positions of Mars, Venus, and a sparkling cluster labeled H. 403, the Messier catalog number for the Hercules globular cluster. You watch a group of young poets huddle around, reciting lines they've written about Taurus, describing its bull as a silent guardian of cosmic secrets. One reciter emphasizes the line with a dramatic flourish, nearly spilling a platter of biscotti. As you smile at their earnestness, you feel the salon's gentle penchant for blending art and science, each rumor and rhyme bridging the gap between well-to-do leisure and celestial wonder. On the far side of the room, a small cluster of leather-bound journals sits on a carved table. Their spines bear names like Annales d'Astronomie and La Lune et les Étoiles, printed in capitals of tarnished gold leaf. One guest flips through a recent edition, pointing to an article describing the latest observations of the Andromeda Nebula, an indistinct, nebulous blotch picked up by larger Parisian telescopes. In just the last decade, engineers have crafted spectroscopes, primitive, yet revealing devices that split starlight into color bands, allowing salon enthusiasts to confirm that that faint glow wasn't smoke from a distant forge, but something far more cosmic. You sip your tea, tasting subtle notes of fennel, and consider how revolutionized public access to such journals has nurtured this collective enchantment with the stars. A quirky tidbit flutters through the air. A barber-turned-amateur astronomer rigged up a makeshift observatory atop his shop's roof. He traded discounted shaves for access to his brass refractor, dubbing it Barber's Periscope to the planets. Locals joke that if you desired a close shave and a view of Sirius, you knew exactly where to go. You can't resist chuckling at the image of someone tracing their client's chin while squinting through an eyepiece to spot Betelgeuse rising. It's both ludicrous and endearing, an odd footnote in Paris's larger fascination with celestial spectacles. As you lean in to listen, you overhear a visitor remark that, this very month, a modest troupe of Parisians organized a starlight soiree at a nearby garden, transporting guests to a grove of chestnut trees where a single telescope, mounted on a wooden plinth, invited them to trade gossip about peacock feathers and bonbons for hushed reverence before the heavens. Lanterns hung on low-hanging branches, their glow competing with the dimming twilight. The host set out small folding chairs, each topped with a cushion embroidered with a star chart, so guests could recline comfortably while their eyes adjusted to the dark. You imagine yourself reclining among them, the scent of wild ivy mingling with the distant river breeze. The hush that falls over such a gathering feels akin to a communal confession, a recognition that beneath the swirl of Parisians' daily bustle, an immutable cosmos beckons all. Your gaze drifts to an elegantly dressed woman seated near the fireplace, her eyes alight with quiet excitement. She's scribbling furiously in a leather-bound field journal, sketches of lunar craters, precise notes about the moon's terminator line on this particular evening, and musing on whether the dark spots might conceal ancient seas. You notice her nails painted a soft dove gray, an echo of the moon's surface hue. She leans close to share her observations. She's discovered a minute discrepancy between her calculations and those in a recent article on the lunar seas. And she suspects that a local lens maker's newly ground convex lens might resolve the error. As a mainstream historical fact, you understand that lens makers in Paris, especially those on the Al de la site, had begun experimenting with steam-powered grinders, producing lenses with fewer distortions than ever before. Such incremental improvements thrilled amateurs, who now compared notes at each salon gathering, debating whether the Paris lens equaled the famed British crown glass counterparts. Another peculiar vignette. On a particularly foggy night last winter, an amateur astronomer with a penchant for practical jokes placed a small lantern on a distant hill near Montmartre. His goal? To mimic a new star in Cassiopeia and watch as curious stargazers, peering through their telescopes, scrawled frantic notes, only to discover they had merely spotted his joke. The prankster was never prosecuted, perhaps because his joke highlighted a broader truth, that even in this era of advancing optics, Parisian enthusiasts understood the limits of their instruments and delighted in testing them to the brink of absurdity. In this salon, these anecdotes feel like whispers in a tapestry of starry admiration. You sense the thrill that comes with discovering how near your telescopes can come to rivaling those at established observatories. Gas lamps outside reduce the sky to a pale wash of gray, yet the promise of escaping that haze to glimpse Mars's ruddy surface keeps salon guests buzzing. You recall earlier discussions about the clockmaker's orrery, now transferred into the living room for tonight only. its intricate gears rotating minute moons around a brass sun. It stands a reminder that human ingenuity can miniaturize the cosmos, even as you yearn to penetrate real celestial depths. The orrery, with its softly ticking gears, serves as a quiet counterpoint to the room's anticipatory hum. Every so often, a hush descends as someone steps forward to demonstrate a handheld spectroscope, an unassuming cylinder of cardboard and thin slits. The demonstrator angling it toward a gas lamp flickers, but he's claimed that if you hold it steadfast toward Orion's belt at just the right elevation, you can glimpse the absorption lines, dark bands carved out of starlight, that hint at hydrogen's presence. Witnesses peer over his shoulder, murmuring phrases like extraordinary and unbelievable with wide eyes, as though they've glimpsed into the universe's hidden code. You consider how that fascination spreads. Salon guests trade addresses, promising to meet at Montmartre's summit next Tuesday, when the sky will clear. The social buzz around these plans transforms amateur astronomers into secretive conspirators, aligning calendars as eagerly as lovers longing for a rendezvous. As you absently trace the veins on your tea saucer, you realize that the public's allure for stars extends beyond Paris's boulevards. It has infiltrated print culture. Weekly gazettes feature Star Watch, a column anticipating lunar eclipses, Venus's greatest elongation, or an upcoming meteor shower. Illustrations of shooting stars, drawn in gentle charcoal strokes, grace the margins of advertisements for hair pomades and toothpastes, reminding you that even commerce taps into the celestial fever. You catch a glimpse of a magenta-inked advertisement pasted discreetly behind the tea trolley, promising astrophotography. Capture the moon's face in your own salon. The Latin flair of photography astronomique charms you, despite the fact that no guest here yet owns a camera sensitive enough to record more than a hazy blotch. A delicate hush curls over the room as you notice the hostess gently rise and signal for attention. She steps to the center where her aura rests like a silent companion. In the half-dark, she offers a brief nod of gratitude to the assembled guests for bringing telescopes, spectroscopes, and star charts, noting how Paris itself has become a hub for inquisitive minds. She reminds everyone that tomorrow, astronomers at the École Polytechnique will host a demonstration of a new Fraunhofer refractor, and she encourages salon members to attend, offering to organize shared carriages to the event. Her words fall like a soothing breeze, weaving together the threads of tonight's conversations and linking this salon's hush with the broader rhythms of Parisian scientific life. You realize that this fascination with stars doesn't exist in isolation. It pulses outward into cafes, universities, newspapers, and even the theaters, where playwrights now script scenes of lovers gazing at Venus as a symbol of eternal devotion. Yet tonight you occupy this sweet nexus where art, science, and sociability converge. As you gently cradle another spoonful of chamomile tea, you feel as though you're perched at the threshold between earthly concerns and cosmic wonder. The salon's gas lamps dim slightly, emphasizing the glow of the aurora and lending a reverent hush to the room. In this moment, you sense that Paris's allure is not only in its grand boulevards or opulent palaces, but in the simple act of raising a brass telescope toward a velvet sky. Beyond the walls of this drawing room, Paris hums with the echoes of cabs rattling the long cobbles and the distant strains of an accordionist coaxing a lullaby from icy silver keys. Yet here, under the halo of chandeliers and the expectant gaze of fellow stargazers, you feel a gentle pull toward infinity. You imagine yourself stepping onto a foggy rooftop after the salon ends, settling onto a chaise longue and resting the telescope's tripod on a wooden plank. The sky above remains overcast, but its promise lingers. You breathe in deeply, tasting a faint trace of coal smoke in the night air, and vow that tomorrow, when Mont Valérie's silhouette frames your view, you will once again lift your gaze to the heavens. You feel the gentle rustle of skirts and silk gowns shift the atmosphere as the salon's quiet focus turns toward its architects, those brilliant salonnières and patrons who transform modest drawing rooms into crucibles of celestial curiosity. You've already observed telescopes gleaming on tables and conversations buzzing about spectroscopes. But now you see how much of tonight's allure stems from the determination of Paris's leading hosts, women whose influence extends far beyond gossip and lace. As you settle into your chair, you tune in to how they marshal conversations, coordinate speakers, and underwrite the very instruments that let amateurs trace Saturn's rings from the comfort of their plush carpets. Directly ahead, Madame Jean Kirsch, her dark hair gathered in a no-nonsense chignon, meets each guest with a serene nod. She's a woman in her early 50s, known for her sharp intellect and her calm voice that could hush a crowded chamber with a single syllable. You've heard that, as a young widow, she inherited enough property in Neuilly to support her ambitions, and that she refused multiple marriage proposals to devote herself entirely to cultivating a salon devoted to art and science. Tonight, she's nestled beside a small side table draped in blue velvet, upon which rest two brass telescopes she commissioned from a renowned optician in the Latin Quarter. As a mainstream historical fact, you understand that by the 1860s, some wealthy Parisian women began using inherited fortunes to underwrite scientific contraptions. Telescope makers like Hubert Lensard openly advertised their wares to discerning salon hostesses who sought to elevate their social circles with cosmic pursuits. You watch Madame Kirsch's expressive hands, her slender fingers draped in lace gloves, as she gestures toward a leather-bound ledger filled with names and addresses. It's her carefully curated guest list of artists, poets, scientists, and aspiring astronomers. These names include well-known playwrights who appear chiefly to lend prestige, but also obscure scholars who wouldn't otherwise find a hearing outside the dusty halls of the Sorbonne. A subtle hierarchy emerges: those with technical expertise, engineers, mathematicians, instrument makers, stand slightly apart, their pensive expressions softened by polite smiles. Meanwhile, fashionable ladies and gentlemen drift closer to the hostess, eager to prove themselves as patrons of science rather than idle spectators. You lean forward as she mentions that Madame Kirsch's true coup de grace was convincing François Arago himself to deliver a private lecture on the latest wave of comet discoveries. The hushed tension when she recounted Arago's arrival still circulates among salon regulars. The prancing of her dogs beneath his carriage wheels, the clicking of her embroidered fan as she introduced him, and the slight tremor of anticipation that gripped the room as Arago, in his voluminous robes, began explaining how telescopes now reveal nebulous knots that once seemed mere smudges. You imagine standing amidst that hush, breathing in the subtle cinnamon scent of Arago's pipe as he pointed toward a hand-held star chart, outlining why a newly spotted great comet might soon grace Parisian skies. Such private engagements were rare, but over the years, similar gatherings have become more common, one of many examples of how wealthy women shaped intellectual tastes far beyond the confines of salons dedicated solely to literature. From another corner, a tall, slender man in a midnight blue frock coat, Baron Louis de Coudray, leans in to congratulate Madame Kirsch on her impeccable scheduling. The Baron supplies not only financial backing but also a modest library of treatises he imported from London and Berlin. As a mainstream historical fact, you know that during this era, a number of aristocratic patrons used their wealth to procure foreign scientific journals and distribute them among salon members. His library includes recent issues of the monthly notices of the Royal Astronomical Society, which he translated on Sunday mornings, annotating each article in fine ink. By networking with opticians and instrument makers, de Coudray sourced specialized eyepieces that improve contrast, allowing a lucky handful of salon guests to discern Mercury's elusive phases. As you sip your lavender tea, you notice he's taken care that his contributions manifest in the smallest details. The Baron's crest is etched into the brass frames of the microscopes he donated to Kirsch's salon, a subtle reminder of his magnanimity. Your gaze flickers to a woman draped in a cinnamon-colored gown, Madame Therese de Montalembert, whom rumor says once used her father's wedding dowry to finance a portable observatory built atop her Montparnasse townhouse. She's seated beside a glinting aurora that replicates the orbits of Jupiter's satellites, and you see her fingers brushing lightly over its polished brass rings as though greeting old friends. Her salon, you've heard, serves as a secondary hub for Paris's amateur astronomers, an intimate space, tucked behind her father's silk tapestry depicting the apotheosis of Hercules. Although she manages the public face of gatherings in her family's lavish home, she prefers to host smaller, clandestine meetings at midnight under the guise of looking over her cousin's astronomical calculations. You sense that her evenings often conclude with her leading small groups up creaking staircases to a rooftop platform, where a battered but reliable refractor stands sentinel against the cold night air. A quirky tidbit drifts to you as she whispers to a nearby poet. Madame de Montalembert once declared that she believed lunar volcanoes erupted lavender-scented mist, to account for the pale glow on the edge of the moon. This fanciful notion, though unscientific, charmed a handful of romantics who collected vintage prints depicting the lunar terminator, spotting pockets of perfumed phlogiston, as they called it. Although we now know that modern telescopes reveal no such fragrant puffs, this odd belief graced a few private letters, and for weeks, Parisian newsstands sold satirical pamphlets titled Le Vendée Lunaire. In tonight's gathering, though, she tells you she's revised her views, preferring to study actual moonquakes, recorded by seismographs installed at the Paris Observatory. As you absorb these details, you sense how the collaborative dance between salonnières and patrons transforms casual stargazing into communal purpose. Each hostess brings her own flair, Madame Kirsch, with her discreet ledger of foreign journals and connections to the observatory's staff, Madame de Montalembert, with her rooftop spectacles and lyrical enthusiasms, and others, like the quietly fierce Comtesse Louise de Vandenesse, who sponsor public star mapping expeditions in the Bois de Boulogne. The Comtesse's particular contribution includes funding a folding star chart printed in an easily referenced pocket edition, specifically designed for chaise-longue reclining. You imagine reclining on Knox-style cushions, leafing through those pocket charts as you wait for dusk to unveil Vega. A fellow guest murmurs a mainstream historical fact. By the 1850s, Paris had at least 5 women-led salons that regularly hosted lectures from professional astronomers, galvanizing a network of amateurs who recorded observations for inclusion in international journals. These women not only invited curious minds, they incentivized participation by holding small rewards, such as custom-made brass candlesticks, for the best astronomical sketch of a lunar eclipse. That friendly competition is what you see now. On a narrow mahogany sideboard are winners' engravings, carefully framed and labeled with the artists' names, sometimes an unlikely pairing of a seamstress's daughter beside an upper-class maréchal's son. You can almost sense the pride radiating from these keepsakes, artifacts of a culture where scientific curiosity becomes part of one's social identity. Your gaze drifts toward a taller gentleman, his graying sideburns curling beneath a velvet cap. He's known as Monsieur Émile Fontaine, a retired naval captain whose time at sea fueled his passion for navigation by the stars. He's an essential patron in Madame Kirsch's salon, and you see why. He brings real-world accounts, tales of how compasses faltered near the equator, of Polynesian sailors relying on star charts to thread between reefs, and stamps his authority on discussions of stellar parallax. When he speaks, guests lean in, eager to bridge their telescopic glimpses with seafaring lore. You hear him gently correct a young astronomer's assumption about the Andromeda Nebula's distance, reminding everyone that before photography, sea captains plotted maps that pegged Cepheid's positions with surprising rigor. A nimble-fingered artist, seated at a small easel propped by a bust of Voltaire, dusts fine white chalk onto a star chart. She's preparing a tribute piece for an upcoming soirée in Madame de Montalembert's home, and you watch as she outlines the constellation Cassiopeia with trembling strokes. Her attention to detail suggests she spent entire nights with the Paris Observatory's latest printed charts, cross-referencing Messier's 110 objects and plotting each with near scientific accuracy. When you compliment her, she humbly credits the salonnières for providing her both with instruments and with critical feedback. She admits that, earlier that afternoon, she nearly abandoned her chalkboard entirely after misplacing her set of drawing nibs, but a discreet loan from the hostess saved her work. It's this spirit of mutual support, an undercurrent that keeps every visitor here a step from solitary obsession and closer to gentle camaraderie. As the evening stretches further into night, a hush falls whenever a hostess indicates the beginning of a formal lecture or demonstration. Tonight, Madame Kirsch calls upon a professor from the Sorbonne who has agreed to walk the guests through the physics of light diffraction. You watch as they cluster around a single candle, observing how its flame bends through a tiny slit in a brass plate, projecting onto a small screen beneath a telescope tube. Even this simple experiment, you realize, is deftly framed by the hostess's skill. She timed the demonstration for when the salon's windows could be cracked open, letting in a breeze that carries distant tolls of midnight church bells, heightening the sensation that you're witnessing something almost sacred. Through all these orchestrations, you sense that salon hosts and patrons share an unspoken understanding. To maintain the salon's prestige, they must balance educational rigor with a perfect measure of levity. Patrons like Baron de Coudray give grants for lens grinding, while hostesses like Madame Kirsch ensure that every brass orrery sparkles just so under the chandelier's glow. Madame de Montalembert, with her whimsical lunar theories and rooftop observatory, offers just the right blend of eccentric charm to pique imagination without veering into folly. Together, they perpetuate a unique ecosystem, salons that feel neither dusty nor exclusively aristocratic, but rather like welcoming salons of inquiry, where you can savor a petit four as you learn to distinguish between an annular and a total eclipse. As the candle flames flicker lower and the clock on the mantel ticks past midnight, you notice the salonnières exchanging small bows of satisfaction. The patrons, having heard whispered plans of the next lecture on nebular spectroscopy, murmur their assent, as though congratulating each other on successfully weaving art, social grace, and science together in a single tapestry. Somewhere in the dim recesses, a young lady tilts a lens skyward, peering through the rooftop's open window to spy a sliver of moon rising just above the Haussmannian rooftops. The flicker of street lamps outside seems almost overwhelmed by her concentration. For a brief moment, she forgets everything but that silvery crescent framework. You, too, feel that tender absorption. In this salon, each hostess and patron rouses you from mere casual engagement into a deeper sense of participation. They make you feel that even though you hold no official title at the Paris Observatory, you still belong to some grand conversation, one threaded by candlelight and gilded mirror reflections, by boisterous anecdotes about silkworm-fed-made silk lenses, and by the hushed thrill of anticipation when someone finally announces, "I see it! I see Algol's eclipse unfolding before us." In this soft swirl of scarves and murmured exclamations, you sense how salons have become not just pockets of refined conversation, but vital spaces where women and men, nobles and bourgeois, gather to stretch their imaginations beyond Paris's town limits, using telescopes, treatises, and sheer willpower. And you realize that without Madame Kirsch's unwavering organization, Baron de Coudray's discreet funding, and Madame de Montalembert's midnight rooftop theatrics, you might never have found yourself here, lifting a brass eyepiece to glimpse the curve of Jupiter's shadow. As the clock's hands approach one, the salon gradually unfurls back into gentle banter, conversation, and the soft scraping of chairs. The telescopes remain, gleaming in reflection, but the formal lecture has concluded, and you feel that you've absorbed something more enduring than scattered facts, the sense that these hosts and patrons, by weaving financial savvy, artful presentation, and social finesse, have constructed a living bridge between Paris's glittering boulevards and the unfamiliar glow of distant star clusters. You settle onto your cushion as attendants usher in a final plate of sugared melon slices. You savor the cool sweetness and trace the glint of exhaustively polished brass frames as you prepare for the evening's next act, charting the night sky under the watchful gaze of your host's careful guidance. In this moment, you recognize that these salons preserve more than casual whimsy. They nurture a genuine thirst for understanding, grounded in hospitality and softened by candlelight. And so, as you lift that final spoon of syrupy melon, you feel ready to continue your voyage among these Parisian stars, led by the gracious hands of salonnières and patrons who have shown you how to reach for the heavens from the heart of the city. You ease back into the salon's cushioned world, balancing a delicate porcelain cup of rose-scented tea in one hand and the soft, worn leather of a star chart in the other. The interplay of telescopes and teacups has become the salon's defining rhythm, an artful dance that marries the refined ritual of afternoon tea with the hushed rapture of stargazing. You might have once pictured telescopes as massive contraptions impossible to maneuver indoors, yet here they perch on small wooden tripods beside embroidered settees, gleaming like miniature lighthouses calling out to curious souls. As a mainstream historical fact, by the mid-19th century portable telescopes, specifically brass refractors with collapsible tubes, were widely marketed to affluent Parisians, transforming private drawing rooms into impromptu observatories. Tonight, you're witness to how these compact marvels slip easily into salon discourse, where connoisseurs of tea leaves and telescopic lenses mingle seamlessly. The hostess, Madame Kirsch, leans toward you with a knowing smile. She lifts her teacup to her lips, sending a swirl of fragrant steam drifting toward the ceiling. "Ah, but you see," she whispers, "it's all about presentation. A well-polished lens beside a silver teapot is practically guaranteed to spark curiosity." You nod, sipping the rosy brew as your senses delight in its gentle sweetness. Across the room, a lady in a peach blush gown carefully adjusts the lens of her brass refractor, its collapsible tube extended just enough to peer through a small slit in the drapery, sneaking a glimpse of the velvet night beyond. "I swear," you overhear her declare to a companion, "nothing compliments bergamot quite like the sight of Jupiter's moons." You chuckle inwardly at the unexpected pairing, yet you cannot deny the charm of her sentiment. The salon's arrangement is deliberate. A semicircle of telescopes, each angled differently, surrounds a central table where teacups clink and pastries await. The variety of instruments tells a story. One telescope is a fine example of a 6-inch aperture brass refractor, complete with a mahogany tripod and sliding draw tube. Its owner, a retired naval engineer, boasts that he saved for 3 years to procure it from a workshop on Rue de Rivoli. He demonstrates, in a low, enthusiastic murmuring, how adjusting the eyepiece's micrometer screw can sharpen a view of Saturn's faint rings. Nearby, a gentler instrument sits, a 2-inch collapsible refractor encased in a leather sheath, owned by a fashionable Parisian milliner who insists it complements her feathered hats. She proclaims, with a slight accent of coquettish pride, that she has already glimpsed polar ice caps on Mars, though one must admit the view was less crisp than Monsieur Arago described. You pivot as the hostess waves toward a different table where a modest telescope rests upon a velvet cushion. Its owner, a young sculptor, wields a fountain pen like a conductor's baton, sketching what he sees through the lens. With each turn of the focus knob, his charcoal-stained fingers trace the moon's rugged edge, pausing at small craters he cannot yet name. "I confess," he tells you quietly, "that I once thought my hand unsteady, but this afternoon I adjusted the tripod's legs until the lens stilled. Now I see Tycho craters' bright rays cutting across lunar plains with astonishing clarity." You sense his reverence and imagine how, a decade earlier, amateurs like him relied on large mountaintop observatories to witness such details. Tonight, technological advances have collapsed that gap. Lens grinding techniques refined in Paris workshops yield portable instruments that satisfy even the most exacting amateur. A quirky tidbit drifts from a cluster of guests sipping lavender lemonade at the tea trolley. They're discussing a local lens maker who purportedly offers custom, albeit somewhat secretive, engraving services that emboss a private motto onto every lens cap. Elon's brother, the young physician astronomer, leans forward to whisper to his neighbor that he knows someone who had Carpe Noctem inscribed. But he warns, the lensmaker's studio sits over a basement so damp that many worry it might corrode metal over time. You smirk at the notion of a damp Parisian basement secretly housing mirrors and lenses destined for some hallowed observatory, yet you sense a deeper truth. The personal customization of telescopes reflects how amateurs forge intimate connections between scientific inquiry and social identity. As you swirl your tea, you recall how several weeks ago, A proposed treatise on refractor design caused a minor scandal in Parisian scientific circles. Historians still argue whether the published claims about superior achromatic corrections owed more to marketing bravado than empirical testing, but salons like this one buzzed with debate for days. Some guests, mostly traditionalists, insisted that British crown glass lenses remained unmatched, while others trusted local Parisian grinders whose steam-powered wheels promised fewer aberrations. In tonight's arrangements, you suspect a tactical blending of both. The Baron de Coudray's refractors sport British eyepieces paired with Parisian bodies. A silent compromise acknowledging both schools of lenscraft. Your attention drifts to a slender woman in a moss-green dress who approaches the tea trolley with exquisite poise. As she reaches for a small sugar cube, her gloved hand reveals a faint smudge of black soot on her fingertips, a telltale sign she's been grinding lenses in her father's workshop beneath the Latin Quarter. She turns and offers you a polite nod. I find that observing Vega's subtle blue-white glow pairs best with the delicate lavender shortbread, she murmurs, her voice almost a breath. The cool sweetness seems to counterbalance the star's pulsating brilliance. You can't help but nod in agreement. There is something inherently soothing about pairing sensory delights, fragrant tea, buttery pastry, with scientific marvels that seem light years away. Across the room, a gentleman in a velvet coat brandishes a small, rather unwieldy Newtonian reflector, a curious sight, as reflectors had traditionally remained confined to large observatories due to their cumbersome tube lengths. He explains, in a conspiratorial hushed tone, that he acquired the mirror from a Czech artisan who insisted on parabolic curvature. Though he admits its portability leaves much to be desired, balancing it at my balcony feels akin to wrestling an unruly cat. He delights in its ability to show nebulae as pale smudges glimmering like pearls on black velvet. You lean in closer, catching a whiff of wood polish and lemon oil emanating from his tripod, and wonder whether his Perseus-mounted mirror yields any view of the faint horsehead nebula lurking behind Orion's shoulder. The salon's structure ensures that teacups and telescopes cohabit harmoniously. Soft rugs underfoot muffle the scrape of tripod feet, and white silk napkins protect sumptuous crimson carpets from stray drops of tea. Nearby, a gentleman stands, chin cradled upon his hand, explaining to several wide-eyed listeners how he once caught lens dew collecting on a particularly chilly dawn when he left his refractor on his aristocratic aunt's rooftop. That dew, he says, formed a thin film that temporarily magnified Venus's crescent until the sun rose. You imagine the surprise on his aunt's face at finding her rooftop telescope frosted over like a glass of iced lemonade on a hot afternoon. It's these peculiar anecdotes, equal parts pragmatic and whimsical, that animate salon discourse with warmth and camaraderie. You notice that telescopes themselves have become tokens of prestige. The richest patrons boast instruments encrusted with mother-of-pearl inlays or gilded filigree, while craftsmen of modest means display plain brass models adorned only with hand-painted constellation motifs. One young poet, sporting a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles, points out how his telescope's leather carrying case was embossed with the Latin phrase ad astra, a gift from his fiancée. The case, he whispers, was made from repurposed wine barrels, which he claims gives the instrument a subtle aroma of oak. You smile at the mixture of romance and resourcefulness. It seems that telescopes here convey not only scientific ambition but also personal narratives of love and endurance. A quiet hush falls as Madame Kirsch gently taps her teacup on the silver saucer, signaling a short impromptu lecture on chromatic aberration, one of the most persistent inconveniences of refractors. A small group of guests gathers around her and a modest wooden stand where she places a simple demonstration lens. She shows how light entering a spherical lens can fragment into rainbow slivers, blurring objects at the edge of view. As she speaks, you sense that her every gesture, her twitching of lace cuffs and the gentle tilt of her chin, strikes the perfect balance between scholar's seriousness and hostess's warmth. She invites a curious chemist to bring a beaker of water illuminated by a candle's flame. As the light passes through the drop, guests gasp softly at the arc of colors that snaps into view, a reminder that optics often rely on principles shared by both astronomers and alchemists. Your teacup sits half empty now, cradled between fingers that occasionally trace the salon's wallpaper pattern, intertwining vines set against muted gold filigree. You feel the warmth of the teacups seep through the porcelain, reminding you of past evenings when you sipped chocolate-coated almonds beside more conventional antiques. Tonight, however, teacups and telescopes share equal standing, one vessel for sensory delight and the other for cosmic revelation. They meld into a ritual: sip, peer, note, and repeat. You shift your gaze to the leather-bound guest ledger laid open on a central writing desk. In elegant script, a recent entry notes that the next evening's salon will feature a demonstration of a new aerostat telescope, an instrument designed to float aloft on hot air balloons, promising clearer views above the city's haze. It strikes you that this detail embodies both the inventiveness of Paris's amateur astronomers and the boundless appetite for novelty. Why stop at rooftop observatories when you can drift nearer the stars themselves? It's an ambitious vision, some would call it fantastical, and you can almost hear the hushed skepticism stirring among more conservative guests. After all, historians still argue whether such aerostat telescopes ever produced meaningful observations or merely served as charming diversions. But tonight, buoyed by steam-heated lens grinders and candlelit enthusiasm, such debates feel like a testament to lively inquisitiveness rather than rigid doubt. As you cradle your teacup in quiet contemplation, your eyes wander to the Venetian mirror on one side of the room. Its glass, tinged faintly with oxidation, reflects a tableau replete with flowing S-shaped armchairs, ladies in gowns with lace trains draped across plush Moroccan rugs, and gentlemen whose silk cravats complement the shimmer of polished brass. It also captures the subtle spectacle of telescopes catching lamp light, concentric circles of reflection converging toward black lenses like portals to another dimension. You realize that the salon's magic isn't simply in the objects themselves, but in the way each guest navigates between sipping their tea and calibrating their eyepiece. There's a hush that falls, not of solemnity but of shared anticipation, everyone waiting for that moment when someone announces, in a reverent whisper, "I see it." And when that announcement comes, the room collectively shifts, teacups set aside, eyes fix on the lens, and trembling anticipation hovers as each guest contemplates what those tiny rings of Saturn or the ghostly blur of a nebula might mean for their place in the universe. In those moments, distinctions of social rank, wealth, or gender momentarily dissolve. All that matters is the lens's clarity, the telescope's alignment, and the chance to witness something that has lingered light years away until now, visible through brass and glass, filtered through candlelight, and carried on the scent of rose-scented tea. You lean back, savoring a last sip of warmth, and note that even as strangers across the room, you're connected by the hum of celestial conversation. Telescopes have become more than instruments, they are tokens of shared wonder, anchors for gentle debate, and catalysts for intimate social rituals. As the hostess guides a few guests to reposition their tripods for a better view of the waxing gibbous moon, you tuck the teacup's empty saucer beneath your arm, feeling both refreshed and eager to join the next circle of curious stargazers. For tonight, in a candlelit Parisian salon, telescopes and teacups converge to form a unique milieu, one that invites you to sip, to peer, and ultimately, to dream beneath velvet skies. You settle into the plush warmth of your chair, eyes drawn to a large unfolding star chart pinned to an easel near the fireplace. A hush ripples across the salon as Madame Kirsch steps forward, instructing everyone to lean in so they can see how to translate the heavens onto parchment. Though you've glimpsed constellations through telescopes, tonight you discover a deeper layer: amateur celestial mapping. Parisian stargazers gather around ink tables smeared with charcoal dust, teaching each other how to chart stars, nebulae, and planetary positions by candlelight. It's as if you're witnessing a silent, communal translation of velvet skies into something a hand might hold. A mainstream historical fact whispers through the room: by the mid-19th century, many amateur astronomers relied on the Paris Observatory's monthly ephemerides, detailed tables listing planetary coordinates at precise times, to guide their home observations. Guests lean over open folios of those ephemerides, murmuring about the differences between solar and sidereal time before carefully copying numbers into small notebooks. You watch as one gentleman adjusts ink on a dip pen, then steadies his breath, illustrating Cassiopeia's W shape by placing 5 ink dots on cream-colored paper. His neighbor whispers that the observatory's printed charts once cost a considerable sum, more than many could afford, so this evening's demonstration saves them from traveling far just to update their star maps. In a far corner, the sculptor who sketched lunar craters now peers over the shoulder of a young chemistry teacher. The teacher is showing how to mix lampblack with linseed oil to create a homemade ink darker than store-bought varieties, ideal for marking faint stars. You're intrigued by the remarkable ingenuity. Lamplight catches the subtle glint of metallic particles in the ink as the teacher dips a goose quill and scribbles a titanic circle representing Hydra's boundaries. A small group leans close, inspecting how the ink saturates the fibers of handmade paper. They nod approvingly, noting that the ink's viscosity prevents smudging, a common frustration when mapping multiple celestial objects in one sitting. Nearby, a lady in a jade-green gown carefully measures the angle between Aldebaran and Betelgeuse on her stellar chart, using a handcrafted pair of dividers fashioned from silver-tipped bamboo. You watch as she places one point at Aldebaran's ink dot cross, then opens the dividers until the distance matches the printed scale at the bottom of the chart. With care only a consummate milliner might display, she transfers that span to a fresh map, marking the second point and connecting the dots with a fine line. Each movement seems so deliberate, so yielding a tactile memory of the sky. If you close your eyes, you might feel the cool metal guiding your hand, as though you could sense the stars between your fingers. A quirky tidbit drifts toward you. A novice astronomer named Marcel Bernard once experimented with using scented lavender ink so that charting sessions smelled as soothing as the gardens he recalled from his childhood estate. Although lavender-infused ink never gained popularity, many complained it attracted dust and dampened up parchment. His guests tonight giggle appreciatively as they watch him dab purple-hued ink across his sheet, leaving behind a faint floral aroma that momentarily drifts into the room's warmth. It's a whimsical reminder that Paris's amateurs crave both precision and poetic charm, merging artistic flair with scientific rigor. The center of attention remains the oversized chart, which displays the northern sky as seen from Paris in February 1857. Madame Kirsch's slender finger traces the route of the Milky Way, encouraging guests to note how it arches from Perseus through Auriga to Lepus. She explains that mapping these nebulous regions requires patience. One must observe repeatedly over several nights to confirm whether a faint smudge is indeed a nebula or merely a wisp of candle smoke clinging to the telescope's edge. You sense her voice soften, as though whispering a secret ritual, when she reveals that some amateurs sketch nebulae by first shading their paper with charcoal and then erasing the positions of stars, creating silhouettes of those pale cosmic clouds. You turn to the young engineer who helped organize tonight's materials. He points to a collection of small brass compasses scattered across a low table. These, he murmurs, help align our charts with true north. Without setting north correctly, every plotted star drifts off by a few degrees. He gently lifts a compass, its glass face gleaming, and places it on the arm of the chart's wooden frame. The needle immediately swings to indicate the cardinal direction, steadying itself. Nearby, a gentleman with wire-rimmed spectacles adjusts the chart's orientation, then uses a straightedge to draw a neat vertical line. You realize that, by constructing a basic grid on paper corresponding to the local meridian and equator, amateurs can reproduce the night sky's geometry in miniature. Every now and then, someone gathers a cluster of matches, unlit, and places them in a shallow bowl. They use the matchsticks to extend lines beyond the chart's borders, sketching out the wider wingspan of constellations like Draco or Hydra that spill across multiple grids. It's a practical touch, letting the eye comfortably rest on constellations that would otherwise vanish into narrow edges. You feel a sense of quiet admiration for these delicate compromises, as though each chart is a hushwork of tiny decisions balancing accuracy with aesthetic clarity. Across from you, a man in a rumpled frock coat shares another mainstream historical fact: the use of double refraction star charts, featuring superimposed grids that account for atmospheric refraction, sealed the reputations of many Parisian amateurs. By correcting for the way Earth's thick air bends starlight at low elevations, these charts offered a glimpse of how stars truly align when seen from city rooftops. An amateur might calculate refraction angles in the glow of candlelight, then apply slight corrections to the plotted positions. You imagine him squinting at those tiny figures, cross-referencing with tables he memorized only yesterday. Madame de Montalembert glides over and crouches beside a young lady whose chart displays a small cluster of record-keeping tables. The tables note each date's lunar phase, notes on cloud cover, and brief jottings about dew formation on lenses. "Always record the dew," she murmurs, "for a fogged lens can make you think you've discovered a fleeting comet." The young lady nods solemnly, her lips parting in a slow exhale. You catch a glimpse of a damp circle on her map's edge, already warped by moisture. You realize that accurate charting demands not just skill but vigilance against numerous unpredictable variables: weather, imperfect craftsmanship, even the faintest tremor when a passing carriage rattles cobblestones below. You watch as another guest, a retired army captain with a mane of silvery hair, lifts a brass sighting scope, no lens, simply a narrow slit, and aligns it with Polaris to check the chart's orientation. He murmurs that before the advent of crosshair eyepieces, this method offered sufficient guidance to establish whether Narcissus's charting quadrants matched the true sky. He's jotted notes in a marginal column: September 2nd, 1856. Polaris alignment drifted by 0.07 degree due to wind gusts. November 14th, 1856. First clear sighting of Andromeda nebulosity with only 3 aperture. As he shares these anecdotes, you sense that charting is as much an exercise in patience as it is in mathematics. A lesson in humility when one's ink smears or a gust of wind rudely resets one's compass. Tonight's lesson flows like a gentle stream: observe, record, compare, and revise. Each guest exchanges notes, and someone has thoughtfully provided a low table where one can rest an open book of Messier's catalogue, his famous list of nebulae and star clusters. A woman in lavender reading spectacles carefully references Object 42 as they compare their sketches of the Owl Nebula. Though Paris's glow dims fainter than in London, amateurs notice that at certain angles, atmospheric clarity allows even city lights to fade in comparison to the faint smudges charted by Messier's original counts. A quirky moment arises when a guest, perhaps a bit too eager, accidentally brushes ash from his cigarette onto a pristine chart, leaving a tiny cratered smear that resembles lunar pockmarks. A ripple of polite laughter follows as he quickly snuffs his cigarette in a nearby gilt tray and reaches for his ink bottle to erase the blemish. You see him apologize with exaggerated solemnity, yet the others assure him the mark almost resembles a new crater, fueling speculation that perhaps a comet exploded overhead, raining down fresh debris. No one takes the joke too far, but the image of creating accidental lunar landscapes with cigarette ash lingers in your mind. By the fire's glow, you notice that charts have become conversation pieces, each one offering a glimpse into its creator's temperament. Some are minimalist, just stars, lines, and essential labels, while others bloom with decorative flourishes, marching ribbons of constellations traced in filigree. One artist has even embroidered tiny silk threads alongside a map, depicting the Milky Way's milky band with delicate loops of silver thread. It's an ephemeral fusion of art and science, capturing both the discipline of observation and the whimsy of human creativity. Gradually, you sense the entire salon's attention tethered to a final demonstration. Madame Kirsch instructs guests to tilt their charts at a specific angle under the lamplight, revealing faint watermark grids previously invisible. She explains that these watermarks, pressed into paper by master papermakers in Sèvres, serve as guides for drawing the line quadrants, ensuring that one's lines remain straight even when eyes tire under low light. The group nods appreciatively, impressed that such meticulous craftsmanship underlies each blush of ink on paper. It's a reminder that every element, paper, ink, compass, sighting, scope, carries a lineage of skill and tradition. You realize that through these shared charting sessions, Parisian amateurs form a subtle fellowship. After mapping is done, they compare their final products. Two charts placed side by side often reveal slight discrepancies. One chart showing the Pleiades cluster a hair to the left, another marking it slightly lower. They discuss possible reasons: a misreading of ascension, a misaligned compass, or perhaps the effect of candle flame flicker causing a momentary blur. The camaraderie lies in diagnosing these slight errors, then pledging to reconvene the next clear night to retake measurements. By the time you clip your chart to a small wooden clipboard and tuck it under your arm, the salon's candles have burned down lower. Shadows flicker against the walls, and the star chart's ink gleams dimly. You rise slowly, allowing your eyes to adjust between ink charts and the room's warm glow. You feel a serene satisfaction, remembering how once you wondered if mapping the sky from a drawing room might feel contrived. Instead, you've witnessed Paris's amateurs convert curiosity into precision, blending the textures of candle-warmed paper, ink, and conversation. As you step away from the glowing hearth, you carry a gentle resolve. Tomorrow, before dawn breaks, you'll climb a narrow stairwell and spread your chart beneath the emerging stars. You'll use your own compass and quill, guided by the lessons learned in this salon, to plot the position of Spica or Vega. Then, when you return, you'll compare your drawing with your neighbors and savor the shared delight of discovery. In tonight's chorus of chalk dust, deft pens, and careful candlelight, you've learned that charting the night sky requires neither grand observatory nor lofty title, only a willingness to trace the universe's curves in ink, one deliberate dot at a time. You settle back into the plush folds of a velvet chaise, feeling the faint weight of anticipation as the salon's focus subtly shifts toward its most passionate amateur astronomers, those Parisian nobles and bourgeois who straddle both courtly obligation and skyward curiosity. As you lean forward, you catch sight of several figures pivoting around a circle of telescopes, each instrument acting as an extension of their identity, whether noble lineage or artisan ambition. Tonight, you come to recognize them not merely as salon guests but as individuals whose devotion to stargazing transcends mere pastime, merging with their social standing and personal reputations. First, there's Vicomte Adrien de Louvigny, his aristocratic bearing softened by a pair of well-worn leather gloves that bear faint smudges of lens polish. You observe how his posture straightens as he peers through a brass refractor mounted on a tripod fashioned from cherrywood planks, tinted dark from years of exposure to kerosene lamp glow. As a mainstream historical fact, you recall that many French aristocrats in the mid-19th century cultivated scientific hobbies to maintain relevance after the July monarchy's shifts curtailed purely hereditary privileges. The Vicomte leans toward you and, in a gentle baritone, recounts how he first glimpsed Saturn's rings at age 17 using a borrowed telescope from his uncle, a diplomatic envoy stationed in London. His eyes flicker with quiet pride when he mentions that he later commissioned a larger, custom-made instrument engraved with his family crest, a pair of crossed sabers beneath a crescent moon. As he speaks, you notice a small tin box on the side table beside him, engraved with the words Pluie d'Étoiles in delicate script. He gently opens it to reveal a handful of small hand lenses and eyepiece filters tinted in pale green or rose, used to mitigate the glare of bright stars. He offers you a peek through one filter. Suddenly, Jupiter's immense disk appears as a softly glowing orb-tinted rose. You smile, charmed by how his aristocratic detachment melts into boyish wonder as he says, "You see, my dear friend, these little glass fragments make all the difference." His meticulous approach to optics speaks volumes. He consults detailed tables to calculate the optimal hue of each filter, ensuring it matches atmospheric conditions. A few feet away, you spot Baronne Helene de Piron, a tall, slender woman whose raven black hair has been styled in an elegant chignon. She wears a midnight blue gown embroidered with silver filaments that shimmer like distant stars whenever she moves. In her gloved hand, she cradles a delicate handheld micrometer, a device that looks more suited to laboratory work than a drawing room demonstration. You watch her steady the micrometer near a slim refractor, calibrating the lens's focal length to measure angular distances between stars. She explains, in a hushed but confident voice, that she has contributed observations to the review d'Astronomie under the pseudonym H. Dupeyron, since some peers still frown upon women signing scientific publications. Her knowledge stretches beyond Paris. She has corresponded with the Royal Astronomical Society in London, trading letters filled with sketches of nebulae. A quirky tidbit drifts from her conversation with a keen-eyed chemist. When she was a girl, she used violet-dyed cotton spheres, harvested during her family's annual harvest festival, to cushion the eyepiece of her father's telescope, believing the delicate fragrance would keep her senses sharp during long winter nights. She admits that one chilly evening, the violet oil seeped into the brass threads, causing a subtle but unsettling hum when she turned a focusing knob. No one knows if it was a result of chemical reaction or just overactive imagination, but ever since, she's kept her violet cotton sealed in a glass jar beneath her dressing table. You can't help but laugh softly at the image of a refined baroness battling phantom sounds while charting the stars. Next, you turn toward an elderly, bespectacled man seated beside a globe-shaped orrery. This is Comte Auguste Lenoir, a retired magistrate whose stern face softens when anyone mentions the Andromeda Nebula. He casually flips a switch that sets the orrery's gears in motion, sending tiny brass spheres rotating around a central lamp representing the sun. As the mechanism ticks in gentle staccato, he explains that he once financed an expedition to observe a total solar eclipse in North Africa, an endeavor that involved chartering a steamship and a caravan of Bedouin guides. You listen as he recalls stumbling in sand dunes before dawn, adjusting a makeshift tripod while wind-carried grains threatened to obscure his lens. Although that expedition occurred more than 20 years ago, he still regards it as the highlight of his life, proof that a magistrate's robe need not confine a man to courtrooms. You absorb his story, marveling at how his aura acts as both a mechanical curiosity and a bittersweet reminder of his travels. I once invited you, my dear friend, he says to you and a group of onlookers, to replace the running candle in my lantern with a lens-shaped ice block, hoping the flame's heat would melt it gradually, forming a unique refractive surface to view Venus. The experiment failed miserably. The ice collapsed halfway through, dousing my lantern in frost, but it remains one of my fondest failures. A wry smile crosses his lips, and you feel the gentle truth of humility. Not every experiment yields results, but every attempt reveals something unexpected about both instruments and observers. As you linger by the orrery, you notice Madame Philippine Leclerc, a softly spoken aristocrat known for hosting intimate stargazing soirees on the rooftop of her townhouse near Place de Vaux. She sits cross-legged on a cushioned settee, delicately leafing through a slim notebook filled with sketches of star clusters and hand-drawn magnitude scales. She explains that she has been teaching local orphans basic celestial navigation, using simple astrolabes crafted by her cousin, a former naval instructor. She describes the delight on the children's faces when they first align their homemade astrolabes with Polaris, and how that same joy radiates from them when they trace constellations on their own star charts. As you listen, she leans forward to show you a small silk pouch filled with polished obsidian pieces. She uses these fragments as sun dimmers, her way of safely observing sunspots during late afternoon sun. You feel the cool glass between your fingers and observe how it barely dims the light without diminishing the sun's warm glow. She confesses that she once attempted to pull a page from an oblique manuscript, an Arabic treatise detailing early Islamic innovations in sun-dimming techniques. But her maid hid it, citing fears of arcane black arts. You giggle as she rolls her eyes, noting that superstition clings even in the most enlightened salons. Near the windowsill, you see Baron Victor Dumont, known among his friends as Le Vagabondier des Étoiles for his propensity to set off unhindered on rural trips to observe meteor showers. Clad in a worn traveling cloak that seems out of place amid silk gowns and polished boots, he unrolls a plaid wool blanket onto the cold stone floor. With a quick gesture, he switches on a small oil lamp and positions his reflecting telescope toward a narrow gap in the drapery. He remarks that he's just returned from Normandy, where he spent a week under unpolluted skies, charting the Perseid meteor paths. You ask him how he manages to convince his chauffeur to drive him so far into the countryside without arousing suspicion. He chuckles, responding that he simply tells his chauffeur it's a family health retreat, and the chauffeur accepts any invitation bearing the Dumont name without question. Despite his aristocratic air, you sense that Baron Dumont frowns on excessive ceremony. When he speaks, his voice carries the faint rasp of someone who has spent too many nights in windswept fields, eyeballing cosmic rays. He shares with you a curious method. He once used a lantern with a red-tinted chimney to preserve his night vision while sketching meteor trails on paper, an improvised technique borrowed from lighthouse keepers who turn to red glass to keep their eyes adjusted during nighttime watch. He jokes that, on one occasion, he startled a local farmhand when the red glow from his lantern loomed through a barn's broken door, prompting the farmhand to think he'd conjured the devil's light. You laugh at the image, but you also sense a tender respect for his resourcefulness in pursuing astronomy without drawing undue attention. Across the floor, you notice Mademoiselle Elodie, a young math tutor whose family piloted a small printing press that specializes in scientific pamphlets. She sits at a low writing desk, editing excerpts of her own translation of a German treatise on double stars. You lean in and hear her whisper that she intends to dedicate her translation to Madame de Piran, as a token of gratitude for lending her a rare tome on binary star observation. Her enthusiasm is infectious. She describes the thrill of recognizing Sirius as a binary system, 2 dancing stars, one luminous white and the other hidden beneath the glare. You feel a gentle shiver run through you as she murmurs, "Imagine, the closest star in our sky has a secret companion pirouetting in darkness." A quirky tidbit surfaces when she admits that, to decipher German notation, she once trained her parrot to recite technical terms, like Doppelstern and spectral analyze, so she could practice pronunciation while dusting her family's library shelves. The parrot, she elaborates with a laugh, now squawks spectral analyze. Whenever someone mentions tea, causing her aunt to suspect the bird is mocking her afternoon routines. You cannot help but grin at the thought of a parrot exclaiming technical astrophysical jargon, transforming a refined salon into something almost delightfully absurd. One final figure lingers in your mind, Chevalier Etienne Morel, a retired cavalry officer whose history of mapping Napoleonic battlefields gave way to mapping lunar topography. He carries a leather satchel bulging with notebooks smudged by candle soot and pencil marks. Setting down a polished cowhorn naive astrolabe on a cushion beside him, he explains that he's drawn parallels between terrain features in northern Italy and lunar mare embryom's ramifications. You sense his scholarly dedication. He has recorded the precise proportions of hills and valleys, convinced that a retired soldier's eye, trained to read Earth's contours, can interpret lunar crater chains. He even proclaims, with a soft chuckle, that mariners once used the moon itself as a navigational aid at sea, forging a celestial continuum between his military past and his present astronomical passion. As you watch Chevalier Morel demonstrate how to align the astrolabe's moving parts with lunar landmarks, you feel enveloped by the salon's combined aura of refinement and ingenuity. Each amateur astronomer, Louvigny, de Piran, Lenoir, Leclerc, Dumont, Hébert, and Morel, embodies a unique fusion of aristocratic duty and celestial wonder. Their instruments, custom-tailored and engraved, become personal heralds of identity as much as tools of observation. With each shared anecdote, the lavender-infused ink, the red lantern meteor sketches, or the parrot reciting German astrophysics, you sense a tapestry of human idiosyncrasy woven into the broader saga of Paris's stargazing culture. By the time you rise from your chaise, the evening air has turned cooler, and the gas lamps outside have dimmed to a somber glow. Yet here, within the glowing hearth of the salon, the devotion of these amateur astronomers lingers like a resonant echo, proof that, no matter one's pedigree, the draw of the heavens unites them in gentle kinship. You tuck your own notebook under your arm, determined to borrow their methods, whether aligning an astrolabe or commissioning a tinted filter, so that when tomorrow night's sky emerges, you too might join their ranks, peering through the lens as one among equals beneath an infinite expanse of stars. You find yourself still warmed by the salon's flickering hearth, the air now thick with fragrant pipe smoke and the hush of post-discussion repose. But before the conversations dissolve completely into dreamy silence and spoon clinks against porcelain cups, someone in the far corner, a thin, silver-haired woman in a violet shawl, rises and, in a voice just above a whisper, poses a curious question. How do you speak to the stars? It is not meant as metaphor. The room stirs with renewed interest. You, too, lean in closer. This is the curious art of sky communication, a pastime so niche it might have been mistaken for superstition were it not so studiously recorded in the personal notebooks of Parisian hobbyists. Some believed, or at least playfully entertained the idea, that with precise light signaling, mirror flashes, coded lantern blinks, even rudimentary heliographs, you could send patterned signals outward into the night sky. Whether meant for Mars, distant intelligences, or simply the joy of ritual, the act itself was regarded as a kind of celestial poetry. Mainstream historical fact? Well, around this time in the 19th century, France's optical telegraph system, those semaphore towers blinking messages across the countryside, was winding down, replaced by electric telegraphy. Yet in quiet corners of Paris, salon-goers mimicked this legacy of blinking beams, not across hills but toward the stars. One salon-goer, a Monsieur Bremont, had become known for constructing a delicate rig of mirrors and lenses on his townhouse roof, designed to catch the last rays of dusk and send timed flashes into the evening sky. He based his system loosely on semaphore patterns but swapped military codes for invented celestial ones. 3 short flashes might mean cloudless, while a slow, long pulse signaled Mars rising. He referred to this practice, with a deadpan face, as astrotelegraphy, and swore he once received a response in the form of a coincidental meteor flash timed precisely with his signal. Naturally, you raise an eyebrow, but even in the world of dreams, a coincidence can feel like correspondence. The practice spread through a few social circles, largely as a whimsical parlor exercise. You picture yourself among them, standing in a small rooftop garden, aligning a polished brass mirror with the setting sun, murmuring to yourself as you flick the lens cover open, 1, 2, 3. Pause. Then again. A tidbit you overhear from an old gentleman in the salon, who smells faintly of cedar polish and bergamot tea, one daring pair of siblings. Armand and Sylvie Lavignac attempted to signal Venus using a converted theater spotlight borrowed from their uncle's opera house. They turned it upward for 6 nights in a row, each evening illuminating a different painted symbol on a linen sheet suspended like a makeshift banner. The drawings grew increasingly abstract: a crescent, a rose, a spiral. By the end of the week, local police had arrived, concerned the siblings were attempting occult rituals. The whole affair was quietly hushed, and the siblings were instructed to keep their planetary correspondence within polite bounds. And yet, the story didn't die. Whispered among salon attendees was the idea that those symbols, the rose, the spiral, were later incorporated into decorative motifs in the ceiling of the Musée d'Arts et Métiers, where Armand had gone on to assist in the design of a telescope exhibit. Historians still argue. You hear someone say over the rim of a teacup, whether those symbols were intentional or merely the flourish of a bored architect. And so the debate lingers, more poetic than scholarly, but no less satisfying. Even children got in on the act. A few wealthy families hired drawing tutors not to teach perspective or still life composition, but star map transcription. The young ones would trace constellations in charcoal, then reinterpret them as coded glyphs, Ursa Major as a ladder, Orion's belt as 3 buttons on a vest. These were then folded into letters sealed in tiny paper rockets. released from balconies during evening salons. The rockets, of course, never reached the stars, often snagging in trees or landing in rain barrels. But the act of sending them gave the children a solemn sense of ritual. You pause here, sipping imaginary tea, as a warm draft of roasted chestnuts wafts in from the kitchen. Across the room, someone begins playing a soft, off-key version of Clair de Lune on a dulcimer. The notes float upward, echoing off walls lined with telescopes, charts, and star globes. Nearby, Madame Noémie de la Roche, who serves as tonight's informal speaker of the sky, is unrolling a scroll of parchment across her lap. On it are odd little symbols, a mix of alchemical notations, astronomical glyphs, and homemade sigils. She smiles gently, noticing your curiosity. They're not spells, she assures you. They're questions. Questions she writes by moonlight and sends with long candle wicks that flicker in Morse-like rhythm beside her rooftop observatory. She tells you, conspiratorially, that sometimes she wakes at 3:17 a.m., always 3:17, feeling the quiet urge to go check her journal. And there, with eerie regularity, she finds a new idea, as if left by the stars themselves. Coincidence? Dreams? The subconscious? She shrugs. Maybe the stars whisper, she says, but only when you're barely listening. A final story reaches your ear as the dulcimer fades. One amateur skywatcher became convinced that Saturn responded to music. He placed an old gramophone on the edge of his rooftop and played the same waltz for 9 evenings, watching the planet through a refractor with clockwork precision. He claimed the rings tilted slightly more each night. Eventually, his family intervened, not to stop him, but to gently encourage him to conduct the experiment indoors, where the neighbors wouldn't worry. And so he placed the gramophone beside a telescope angled through the attic skylight, serenading Saturn in private. The neighbors still heard the waltz and smiled. Whether through mirrors, songs, symbols, or violet candlelight, the message is clear. These Parisians weren't merely observers of the cosmos. They were its pen pals. You feel the urge, now, to step outside and blink a pattern of your own into the starlit air. You don't expect an answer, but there's comfort in the sending. It's getting late, or rather timeless. Your sense of the hour has softened like candle wax. Yet still, the salon hums. The velvety hush between clinks and page turns is now accented by a faint rustle near the window, where the curtains have been drawn aside to reveal a modest telescope, modestly aimed. And near it, a tiny group leans in not toward the stars, but toward a curious stack of papers covered in careful sketches. What's this, you wonder? Tonight's topic has shifted: celestial cartography. Or, in more practical terms, hand-drawn star maps. Those lovingly inked guides to the night sky that became tokens of both amateur pride and gentle obsession in 19th-century Parisian salons. If you imagine these maps as orderly grids with neatly labeled constellations, you're only partly right. Yes, many mimic the clean, crisp lines of official astronomy publications, but others, well, they veered toward the whimsical, the deeply personal, and occasionally, the bizarre. You crouch beside the stack and glimpse one map drawn entirely in shades of indigo ink, each star replaced by a pressed flower petal. Another resembles a city grid, constellations reimagined as boulevards and intersections. Here lies Orion Street, someone chuckles, pointing at a celestial cul-de-sac leading to what's labeled Canis Major roundabout. The mainstream fact? During the mid-1800s, Paris was home to several printing houses that specialized in astronomical atlases. While these were precise and educational, many salon attendees preferred to create their own, hand-rendered maps based on nightly observations, artistic temperament, and sometimes dreams. One map in particular, passed gingerly from hand to hand, is the work of Claudine Petit, a seamstress by day and skywatcher by night. Her Atlas de l'Âme, or Atlas of the Soul, as she grandly titled it, contains constellations that never existed: the sleeping cat, the lost umbrella, the whispering teacup. Each shape connected stars not by scientific proximity, but by emotional resonance. This one, she once explained, pointing to a dense cluster of inky dots, is for the night I lost my father. Every dot is a question I never asked him. You sense the hush in the room deepen. No one laughs. Even those who normally scoff at sentiment hold their breath a little longer. One fringe tidbit comes folded in the pages of a particularly wrinkled map, a note describing the clockmaker's constellation. Drawn by an unnamed gentleman who allegedly observed a star blink out and reappear, precisely timed, for 3 nights. He declared it proof of a celestial gear turning, a heavenly cog. No such star ever made it into the catalogs, but his map features an elaborate network of labeled wheels in the sky, interconnected with arrows and notes like tick and tock. He vanished from salon records soon after, but his constellation reappeared years later in the margins of a children's astronomy book, suggesting someone kept the idea alive. Another favorite among salon-goers is the weathered map. These are older, coffee-stained, wax-spotted charts passed down or bought at stalls along the Seine. The marks on them, rings from teacups, thumb smudges, notations like fog tonight or cat walked over this bit, are not flaws, but history. They're the human fingerprints of sky watching. The salons treated these like relics. Some members preferred to display them, like paintings, while others insisted on taking them outdoors, trusting the stains to act as lucky charms for clear skies. One map even became a social catalyst. It was made not in Paris, but traded there from Cairo, a gift from a visiting astronomer named Fatima El-Khalil, who had passed through Paris on her way to London. Her map combined constellations with traditional Islamic geometric patterns, forming a lattice of stars that defied Western astronomy's layouts. She had invented her own orientation system. East was always the direction of sleep, and her notes were dotted with poetic asides like "This star reminds me of bread baking and do not look at this cluster if your heart is heavy." Fatima's map was copied, restyled, reinterpreted dozens of times by Parisians enchanted with its design. Some called it the soothing sky. Others the dream quilt. You imagine yourself tracing your fingers along her pattern now, letting its unfamiliar shapes lull your thoughts into soft, spiraling abstraction. Occasionally, disputes arose. Not all constellations were welcomed. One heated debate lasted nearly an hour over a proposed addition, the ink-stained shoe, which resembled a splotch more than a figure. A duel was narrowly avoided, not with pistols, thankfully, but with competitive star naming. The challenger proposed the dozing baker instead. A vote was held, tea was spilled. The stars, indifferent, remained unbothered. These disagreements, while dramatic, were rarely mean-spirited. They often ended in laughter. Or in collaborative maps where both symbols, shoe and baker, were included, lounging side by side in the celestial north. Every so often, a guest would bring a star map stitched rather than drawn. Fabric versions became salon curiosities. Tiny silver beads marked stars, threads connected them in delicate embroidery. These tactile maps were passed hand to hand, even to the blind, who appreciated the sky through fingertip constellations. One woman claimed she fell asleep faster just by running her fingers along the night river, a stitched version of the Milky Way. As the evening deepens, your mind sways gently between wonder and drowsiness. The maps spread across tables like ancient treasure, some rolled, others cracked with age. You imagine making your own, plotting the stars above your bed, naming the bump in the ceiling plaster as your Polaris. You might call your personal constellation the mismatched sock, or perhaps the whispering book. Someone yawns. A man named Henri quietly folds his star map into an envelope and addresses it to himself. He explains he mails himself a new map every year on the same night, so he can read it again as a future version of himself. He says it helps him remember where his mind used to drift, as the salon starts to quiet down. You notice more guests wrapping their maps gently in silk or tucking them into coat pockets, like keepsakes from a dream they're afraid might evaporate by morning. And still, the stars outside remain patient, ancient, indifferent. But here in the salon, each point of light has been named, claimed, doodled upon, and loved, you lean back, mapless but content. Perhaps the real chart is being drawn now, between yawns, shared stories, and your own sleepy thoughts drifting across the sky. You rest your head against the plush curve of a velvet cushion, feeling the salon's warmth begin to drift into memory as the world outside shifts subtly. Tonight, like every other night, you've watched candle flames flicker against gilded mirrors, smelled the faint almond scent of evening pastries, and listened to whispers that wove science and sentiment into a single, soothing tapestry. But now, you sense a quiet undercurrent, an unspoken awareness that these intimate amateur salons might not last forever. The glow of candlelight is slowly being overtaken by electric bulbs and modern observatories, and brass refractors once prized here are setting aside their eyepieces for larger lenses mounted on domed towers. Your thoughts drift to the twilight of salon astronomy, a time when amateur gatherings yielded to scientific institutions that promise greater precision, broader collaboration, and colder, but more rigorous, illumination. In the hushed hush of this moment, you remember that by the late 1860s, Paris's major observatories, most notably the newly expanded Palais des Sciences, began offering public evenings with large refractors capable of revealing Saturn's ring divisions in exquisite clarity. As a mainstream historical fact, you know that by 1877 the Paris Observatory had installed a 12-inch silver-on-glass refractor atop its dome, eclipsing many privately owned instruments and drawing even seasoned amateurs away from their cozy salons. The gentle murmur through the room tells you that those first public demonstrations, often accompanied by formal lectures, siphoned some of the fervor that once belonged to these intimate gatherings. You feel the space tighten slightly, as though the room itself senses the shift from private wonder to institutional authority. A tidy stack of old salon leaflets on a nearby table catches your eye, printed invitations adorned with curling script, offering a night of stargazing by lunar light or a demonstration of spectral lines and comets. You recall the thrill those leaflets once held, promising glittering company and improvisational experiments. Now they feel like the last petals on a dying flower, beautiful, but fragile. You run your finger along the edge of one leaflet, feeling the slight fray where it's been folded countless times. You remember the gentle gasp when someone discovered a new nebula in 1855. You remember how that announcement rippled through salons, carried by eagerness and shared tea. That spark remains sweet, yet it feels tethered to an era that's softening into dusk. As the room's electric lights hum softly overhead, new additions that replace the once common flicker of candle flames, you notice how the salonnières' faces reflect a faint surprise, as though caught between delight and mourning. Electricity here brings convenience. No more trimming wicks or nursing lamp oil. No more worrying about the drafts that snuff out candle flames at inopportune moments. Yet, in each polished mahogany surface, you still see shadows that recall candlelit conversations held under the gentle hum of kerosene lamps. Now the hum is steadier, colder, and it hints at a future where gaslight and lace will seem quaint. Replaced by polished marble floors and rotating domes staffed by suited professionals. You lean forward to absorb a final demonstration. A professor from the École Normale speaks quietly at a small podium, showing photographs of Mars taken with a brand new wet plate collodion process. The room listens, enraptured, but you sense something bittersweet. Photographs, perfect reproductions of the planet's surface, lessen the need to gather in salons and rely on a neighbor's shaky hand on a telescope. Instead of exchanging handwritten canoe-shaped sketches, guests now flip through glossy prints in a bound folio. As a tidbit, you recall that one early photographer forgot to remove a lens filter, resulting in a Martian image rendered in faint violets, an inadvertent work of art sold for a fortune to a Parisian collector who insisted it captured the pearl twilight of Mars. You swallow a breath as the professor concludes, and you can almost hear the subtle echo of historians still argue whether amateur salons simply paved the way for these formal institutions or whether they offered something unique, something human, that cannot be replicated by steel domes and temperature-controlled telescopes. Someone murmurs, and you detect the soft nod of those who recall the hand-warmed lenses, the tender laughter, the small rebellions of calling a star the midnight dancer. You close your eyes and feel, for a moment, the faint resonance of that warmth in your bones. Tonight's salon is quieter than the salons of old. Only a handful of guests remain, 2 or 3 couples draped over low armchairs, sipping the last of their lavender tea, discussing an upcoming lecture at the Université de Paris on spectroscopic binaries. You sense their excitement is genuine, yet subtly less personal, less entwined with the gentle rituals you've grown to know, the shared cylinder of homemade lavender ink, the hush before someone peeks through a brass eyepiece, the sheltered intimacy that once made the world feel as small and wondrous as a firefly's glow. Now these conversations feel more formal, more public, almost like stepping onto a larger stage where fewer hearts beat in tandem with the rhythms of candlelight. You let out a soft sigh, and your mind drifts back through the years, the time you discovered a fuzzy patch of M51 through a neighbor's telescope, the night someone recited a poem about Betelgeuse burning brighter than their regrets. You remember the sense of belonging, of collective wonder, that permeated every hush. Those moments seem timeless, yet you know the world beyond this salon is marching forward, building observatories on distant hills, developing calculus that predicts solar motions with incomprehensible precision. The dreams once conjured here will be realized there, but perhaps without the warm breath of whispered jokes and gentle elbow nudges. Outside, Paris's gas lamps have dimmed, and the streets lie empty. You imagine modern streetlights humming down boulevards, offering steady illumination where once flickered the glow of lanterns. You wonder whether a future generation will gather in climate-controlled rooms, their telescopes mounted on precision-engineered pedestals, eyes shielded from candle smoke, hearts shielded from personal rivalry. The notion feels practical, progress, after all, but you can't help feeling a wistful pull toward the way the stars once felt within the tender circle of salon chairs. You rise slowly, feeling the cool weight of an electric sconce on your cheek as you brush past the wall. The salon's warmth remains tucked in memory, safe once more beneath layers of velvet and lace. You take one last look at the room, telescopes stowed, inked notebooks piled neatly, sedate chatter about upcoming planetarium shows. It is a snapshot of transition, a record of an era's end and another's beginning, a twilight where amateur salons give way to grand observatories. As you step into a crisp night air, you sense the stars above have not changed. They still pulse with ancient light, waiting for whoever looks up, whether in a candlelit salon or beneath the dome of a modern observatory. And you carry their gentle glow in your chest, a warmth no electric bulb can replace. It's quiet now. The gas lamps on the street below have surrendered to a hushed darkness, and the city's hum has retreated into slumber. You stand at the threshold of this salon's memory, tracing your fingertips along the carved doorframe one last time. The events of this evening unfold like pages in a well-loved novel, the soft clink of teaspoons, the whisper of leather-bound journals, and the gentle lunges of curiosity sparkling in every glance through a brass telescope. Though those salons may fade, remember that you once learned to reach for the stars in the warmth of glowing candlelight, surrounded by kindred spirits who believed the universe could be drawn in ink and shaped by dreams. Let the cadence of this wind down lull you now, a slow exhale, a gentle sinking into layers of blankets. Recall how you perched on a velvet cushion, eyes tracing the orbits in an orrery, heart racing as you peeked at Saturn's rings, and then softened when you scribbled notes in a dew-speckled logbook. Remember the whimsical constellations that never belonged on any official chart, yet found home in your imagination, the tired cat, the lost umbrella, the celestial chicken. Trust that those star-laced fantasies, however ephemeral, have kindled a bright ember of wonder that nothing can extinguish. Breathe deeply and let the lingering scent of almond pastries and lavender tea dissolve into the gentle rhythm of your heartbeat. Feel the comfortable weight of your night robes, embroidered deliberately with tiny silver stars that mimic the sky's glitter. Notice how the fabric clings to you like a promise. That curiosity need not end with the candle's final flicker. Beyond these salon walls, Telescopes on towering observatories may now claim the night, their lenses trained on cosmic phenomena with clinical precision. But you, dear listener, know what those polished domes cannot offer: the tender intimacy of observing the heavens alongside someone whose hand brushes your own as they pass you a sweet nibble of raspberry tart. You know the soft thrill of sharing a whispered wonder. Look, the Pleiades glow like pressed flowers, and feeling that sparkle echo in another's silent smile. Now, as you settle beneath your covers, imagine the night sky unfolding above your windowpane, unaltered by time or technology. Let each star become a lullaby, twinkling in its secret cadence. You may drift into dreams where telescopes morph into delicate ferns of light, or where constellations form tales only your heart can tell. Perhaps you'll recall the evening's stories, the lavender-infused ink, the moon's imagined moods, the patchwork of salon anecdotes, as if they were stars themselves, guiding your slumber toward gentle wonder. Sleep is just a longer eclipse, a brief retreat into darkness before dawn's gentle glow. So let the hush of this wind down draw you into soft quietude. Rest in the knowledge that no matter how the world changes, electricity replacing candles, observatories replacing salons, your connection to the stars is timeless. They await you whenever you seek them. Whether through an eyepiece warmed by your own breath or through the lenses of dreams that shimmer behind closed lids. Good night, dear wanderer of the cosmos. The salon's doors may close, but the universe remains open, ready for you to return, again and again, in reverie or reality. Close your eyes now. Let the whispers of past salons guide you into gentle sleep, where candlelight and starlight dance together in the velvet depths of your dreams.